Welcome and thank you for joining PanOpen's Teaching in a Crisis webinar series. I'm Mark Feltzgraff, Regional Sales Manager for PanOpen. Designed by educators, PanOpen is a courseware platform that realizes the promise of open education resources by providing all the components required for widespread use. PanOpen offers complete peer-reviewed content, customization tools, assessment, analytics, LMS integration, and a means of financially sustaining campus-based OER efforts. The turn toward remote digital learning is occurring as institutional and student budgets are often severely strained. PanOpen can help bridge the gap. We would love to provide a more detailed demo and help customize your content as needed. We will provide our contact information at the end of this webinar. As you are preparing to teach biology, sociology, government, economics, or other courses in the fall, what are the best tools, techniques, and educational resources for remote and blended learning? How can or should you incorporate into your curriculum elements pertaining to a crisis that is simultaneously about health, economic, and societal issues? The goal of our discipline-specific summer series of webinars is to address precisely these questions. Before we get started, let me go over some housekeeping. We have disabled chat, but we encourage you to post questions in the Q&A section found at the bottom of the screen. We will be monitoring the questions that you submit and will break periodically to allow for these questions. We may not be able to get to all of them, but we will provide contact information and send out a copy of this webinar according to the email address you registered with. Now I would like to introduce Elizabeth Fitch, our guest today. Elizabeth is an associate professor of biology at Motlow State Community College's largest campus in the Smyrna campus located in Rutherford County, Tennessee. She holds a Master of Science degree in biology from Middle Tennessee State University and a Bachelor of Arts in Fine Arts and Music from Kentucky Wesleyan College. She has served in both faculty and administrative roles. As campus academic dean, she led a campus of over 3,000 students and oversaw all course scheduling and staffing, led and supervised full-time faculty of all academic disciplines, served as the administrative council chair for the college, and worked to develop new academic programs and workforce development initiatives at the Smyrna campus. Motlow State Community College has been one of the fastest growing community colleges in Tennessee for 4 consecutive years, and the Smyrna campus enrollment grew nearly 50% during her time as dean. Prior to her work at Motlow, she taught biology courses and worked for the Center for Cedar Glade Studies at Middle Tennessee State University. She also worked as a park ranger at the Stones River National Battlefield. In June 2016, she completed the John Rausch Future Leaders Institute training in the American Association of Community Colleges Competencies for Community College Leaders. She currently serves as the AAC Faculty Ambassador for Motlow and was recently elected to be the Faculty Council Parliamentarian. Thank you for joining us today, Elizabeth. We'll plan to keep this informal, as I will ask Elizabeth some questions to allow us to take a deeper dive into the topic at hand, and as mentioned earlier, incorporating audience questions as well. If you just joined us, the chat is disabled, but there's a Q&A button that you should see at the bottom of your screen where you can pose questions that you'd like to have addressed today. And we are recording it, so if you didn't hear that announcement at the beginning, we'll be able to send that to registrants afterwards. So to get this started, Elizabeth, you've been teaching online and hybrid courses for several years. What advice can you give professors who may be teaching online for the first time? Specifically, we had a question come in ahead of time asking how you might incorporate library research and data into biology classes. We'd love to hear thoughts from a content perspective, as well as additional tools that you found to be helpful when teaching online.
All right. Welcome everyone, and thank you, Mark, for the introduction and for your team at PanOpen. It's been a real pleasure getting ready for this webinar and thinking about tips to share with everyone. I will try to keep the answers brief so that people have time for questions, but hopefully not too brief. But I guess the first bit of advice I have, if it's your first time teaching online, is find a mentor or the course lead on the course. Hopefully you can teach a course for the first time that someone can help you navigate through. But if not, and you're building it from the ground up, then I can give you tips for that too. And starting with content in the course and preparation. When teaching online, it's different than on ground because you have to prepare for the whole semester. So when the class opens on the first day, the whole thing needs to be laid out. All of the expectations for the students, all of the assignments, all the dates that everything is due, as much as you can have planned out, the better. So actually prepping for an online class can be a little bit harder than on ground, because with on ground, you can kind of navigate as you go. And of course you have a syllabus, but you're not having to build everything in real time. So the content, you can use OER resources. Those are big right now. There's a lot for tools and where to find that. Motlow is good. You can get choice paralysis is what I call it though, where there's like 6,000 resources. So like the people at PanOpen can help you narrow that down and organize the material if you don't want to just tackle it yourself. And there's publisher material too, obviously, and the publishers are good at having ready-made quizzes and ready-made assignments that make it a lot simpler to put a class together really quickly. But I would say keep the course simple, and that doesn't mean make it easy. When I say simple, it should be simple for a student to go in and figure out what's required of them, what the expectations are, when the exams are going to be, and just how the class is going to flow. It should have a simple appearance to it. The syllabus should be clear and concise and easy to find, and your contact information should be really easy to find as well. So if they're not understanding something, they can reach out to you. There's lecture choices. You can do live lectures like we're doing now through a Zoom or some other live platform where you're interacting directly with the students. If that's not going to work for you, there are asynchronous lecture platforms you can use like Kaltura, Camtasia, Flashback Express. You can even do like little voice recordings on your PowerPoint. So that just in general covers content. Plan ahead for course integrity would be the second thing. It is very easy to cheat in online courses, unfortunately. There are websites where students can actually submit the assignment and have someone write it for them. So you're going to want some tools to help you prepare for that, and you're going to want to give that some thought ahead of time. Turnitin is a good software for essays to catch plagiarism for you, and it makes it super easy. I've used that one. If you want a testing, something to monitor testing, like if they can't use the testing center right now in the crisis, like the campus is closed, you may want to look at Respondus, Procterio, something like that, that does an online recording of the student so that you can proctor the exam from afar, or at least watch a recording. So just do keep that in mind. Require student identification. You can do that per assignment where they're having to show an ID and show their face so that you know it's them, because unfortunately they could pay someone else to take the course for them. So those are all valid concerns. And then communication in an online class is different than on ground. And in fact, it's actually a lack of communication, and students feel isolated online. They feel alone. They feel like they're tackling a big mountain all by themselves, and it's super easy for them to get overwhelmed. And I'd say given the current pandemic, that's only amplified that feeling of isolation and that they're alone. So if you can create assignments where they're interacting with each other, either live or maybe breakout rooms in Zoom, that's good. I would email them often. If you're going to use email, I send reminders all the time, like, hey, the first assignment's due in a couple of days. Even though I know that I've been teaching for a long time, and I'm assuming a lot of people on this webinar have too. My instinct from 15 years ago is like, well, they should just be able to figure it out. I shouldn't have to remind them all the time, but things are shifting with this up and coming generation. They do need a lot of nudges. So just sending an email and reminding them is good. Respond to emails quickly, because if you don't, then they get overwhelmed and they'll drop the class. So try to make it fast if you can. I'd say within 24 hours. So that's a shift too. You know, on ground, you're used to only seeing them twice a week, but online, you need to be ready to interact pretty much all the time, or at least have some office hours set virtually that you let them know about. I have a Google Voice number that I put on the course homepage so that students can text me or call me or leave me voicemails, because a lot of them don't use email very well, or they don't even read your emails. I don't send out information on the Google text, but I do allow them to text me on that. And I just tell them I may not answer you at 10 o'clock at night if you text me on that, but I will get back to you as soon as I can. But a lot of them prefer text, so that's a way to do that. So the communication, and then be flexible too, because if it is your first time teaching online, you're going to make some mistakes. You're going to realize that certain assignments didn't work. And so you just have to be willing to bend and figure out what to do. Or maybe you gave them something that really isn't doable. Be forgiving of yourself, but also be forgiving of them too. You're going to have a little more flexibility online. Oh, and then the last part, sorry, Mark, about the library research, that little portion of the question. In an on-ground class, I actually have a librarian come to the class and discuss with them what research databases are available in the library. And I often give that librarian the assignments I have, like a research paper, a pathogen report, a lab report, some type of research that I want them to do in the course. And then she tailors what resources are going to be best for them. That's probably not going to be practical with the crisis if your campus is closed. So you can ask them to come into a Zoom class meeting with you and do it there, or even do a pre-recorded video and then just post that link into your class so that they can watch sort of like a tour of the library and what's available there.
Okay, great. Science courses, and obviously you teach biology, often have a lab component. What are some ways or best practices that you've found for fulfilling the lab requirements when your students are not able to come to campus?
I think that's the biggest sticking point for a lot of science professors is we can wrap our mind around how to do lecture and lecture material online, but the lab is the hardest part. And I will be the first to say that conventional labs are better and probably the best way to learn. To learn how to use a microscope, you need a microscope in front of you. To learn how to focus it and how to find a specimen and really get the concept. So it is best, but there is a demand for online learning, which is real. And then that's only, again, amplified by the current crisis that we're in, that we have to move forward with online. So the best way to do online, there are several things you can choose from. McGraw-Hill has very good Learn Smart labs that are virtual that they can work through. I personally have used those for several years. There are e-science kits as well, where the students can purchase a kit and complete activities at home. So I've had them do pig dissections at home. They get everything that they need, or they do like a brain dissection if they're taking anatomy and physiology, and then they'll take pictures of it for you and put labels on it. And so it's the next best thing to being in class. You can do some online, so OER resources as well. There are some free links to like very small virtual activities, or like a little way to collect data and then analyze it and write up a lab report. And so you just have to get more creative in what assignments you're going to give them that kind of mimic the lab. And then they're submitting assignments that you grade with pictures or reports that you're grading. So there's a lot of different ways, and you can do a mix of those. I've taught courses where it's not all one thing. You may use like McGraw-Hill labs, but you may also use some OER materials to supplement that. So any mix of those things would work.
So getting back to your earlier comment, flexibility becomes increasingly important, right?
Yes, it definitely.
Many of these earlier webinars, we've had people from different disciplines. So one of the things that generally people understand in higher ed and is critical thinking skills are important for students to learn across different disciplines. How are ways that you try to incorporate those skills when students are learning online, or develop those skills further for students?
Right, so everything is harder for the instructor, I think, online, because in an on-ground setting, you can easily have discussions where you're learning how they're thinking about things and then helping them acknowledge what might be some bias and how they need to get around that with some data and some facts and reliable sources. for information. You know, there's a few different ways. Your assignments, your exam questions, you design those to where they require reasoning and logical thought to get to the answer. You know, deductive reasoning rather than just a yes or no answer or quick multiple choice answers. Multiple choice can work for critical thinking, but you have to really think about the design of the questions and the assignments. You also have to relate your course to real life. If students can't make a connection to what they're learning to what's happening in the real world, then they don't see value in it. And you'll hear students say, why do I have to learn this? This is a total waste of my time. I'm never going to use this. You know, but I could argue as a science professor that everything you learn in the course is relevant to your life. And so you have to work towards relevancy and pointing out the concepts that you're teaching and why they need to know this information to just move forward in life. So the relevancy. You can online, so that it's harder. So you may want to do some Kaltura, and I just keep saying Kaltura because I use that, but what I mean is like a video recording, and there's a lot of different things you can use. So I'm not just trying to push them. It's just what I use, but you can video record. Like a lot of times if I assign something, I'll do a quick video where I'm like, here's an overview of the assignment. Here's the way I want you to think about it. Or if you're going to do a discussion post where you want them to really think through a concept and discuss it with each other, you may do a video introduction to that and post it there and point out some things that you want them to consider while they're having the discussion. So it's too easy with the internet too for students and really anyone to just search and find things that are in line with their way of thinking. But students often don't know the difference in things that are based in fact and real data collection. So I have to redirect them to websites that, you know, are based in empirical evidence, science, facts, data that don't have the spin. Because if you just search news sources, oftentimes you're going to get a spin on it rather than having the real facts at hand. You know, for example, I could say, you know, the virus increased 100% overnight, but maybe yesterday it was one person and the next day it's two people, but that's 100% increase. And students aren't used to analyzing statistics and stuff that they're hearing, because you may hear, well, there's a 500% increase, and that really scares you. But when you look at the actual data, while it's still concerning, it's not quite as bad as the statistics may make it sound. So,
That's
yeah.
good.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I ask them, what are you hearing a lot?
Yeah.
I just ask the question, if, you know, if it's in person, great, but online you can still do that. You can still say, hey, email me what you're hearing, or email me some articles that you're reading, or post one to a discussion page and we'll talk about what we see in the article.
We're going to, based on what you were just saying a minute ago, talking about ways to think critically about particularly current events, we're going to jump to that in a minute, but I want to back up to a question that came in from the audience that dials back from our conversation around labs, and this is more specific. Do you have suggestions for organismal biology labs? I'm looking for ways to teach mammalogy lab without students seeing a whole spread of skulls and skins from the museum. Are there good virtual resources that can substitute?
I don't know of any for that particular discipline. I'm sorry. I wish I did. The virtual labs that I've seen with McGraw-Hill are all very general biology concepts and nothing that specific. I don't know that even the eScience kits would have anything that specific. I'd have to do some digging, and I don't mind helping that person if they want to reach out to me, and
okay.
You know, later on we could follow up and I could help them generate some ideas. Sometimes I think of things later too. So for anybody that I say I don't know, I may think of it later. So feel free to reach out and I'll. Yeah,
and we'll be sharing Elizabeth's contact info at the end of this session. So for anybody that wants to continue dialogue with her. Another one that came in from the audience was, and you mentioned at the front end that you try to involve, even for online courses, a librarian, if it has to be via Zoom. Mm-hmm. But do you teach how to evaluate information, or does a librarian that you have come in And then a specific part of that is, do you demonstrate how to read scientific literature?
I do, and the librarian does as well. So, I don't, I usually reserve about 20 minutes for the librarian to come in and do that. But I do talk about scientific articles. They are different than like what they're used to in their English classes. The scientific writing is different. And even the citations are different. The style of scientific writing is different as well. That can be quite confusing to students. So I do go over the differences between what they're learning, like MLA style of citations versus scientific citations. And but the librarian we have does a fantastic job too of pointing out the specifics between the science resources and other classes they might be doing research for.
Great. So you talked a little bit about, when we were talking about critical thinking, getting students to not just trust anything they see on the internet. More specifically to the current pandemic crisis, are there ways that you either earlier this summer or plans for fall of how you would integrate some of these current events related to the pandemic into your curriculum? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, fortunately, and unfortunately, it goes really well with the course that I teach in microbiology, because we cover several chapters, obviously regarding microbes and viruses, viral infection, viral treatment, vaccines, genetic engineering. It pairs really well, unfortunately, the current crisis with the course that I teach. So beginning in January, we already knew that this virus was emerging in China. So I was able to have on the ground talks about that. And at the beginning of every class, I would say, what are you hearing? And we would analyze what we were hearing based with facts that we could draw upon. And I usually redirect students to the CDC, the World Health Organization, even Scientific American at certain times. We still don't have a lot of primary research on COVID right now. So that one's hard because the publications are going to be coming out as we go. But yes, it's easy for me to bring in the current events with the course and link it to what we're teaching. And a coronavirus is a cold virus, and we learn that in the course. And so, but when you say it's novel, novel means new. So there's a lot of ways to help them discern what are we hearing on TV. I think you're muted, Mark. I'm not hearing you.
Sorry about that.
That happens, yeah.
The audience questions again. We had another lab-related question. Someone was curious whether you used Labster for virtual labs, and if so, any thoughts on that?
Labster, I haven't, but I'm going to write that one down and look it up, because I'm always looking for another one. And if that person would reach out to me and tell me what that one is, that would be great.
Okay. Here's one just sort of around audience question around, I guess I'd call it course mechanics for online. Do you study, or do you check students' online course attendance for lecture and lab? And obviously there's different people might have different philosophies, but from your perspective, how do you handle that?
Yeah, for the initial attendance in the course, I do a discussion post, and they have to introduce themselves and share anything that they want to. I mean, I give them suggestions, maybe your major, why are you taking the class, so on and so forth. It's a way for them to get to know each other too, but I will not mark attendance until they do that. And then the assignments are kind of my gauge. And I guess another recommendation for design is to have assessments early and often, but because that's the only way you're really going to gauge whether or not they're doing the coursework and they're staying engaged with the course. So that can be different than what you're used to on ground. Like you may just do 4 exams on ground, but you know they're coming because you're seeing them every day. It's different online. So you probably need to be having quizzes weekly, or things due at a minimum weekly, so that you can kind of see in the grade book that you have who's submitting and who's not. And if somebody's not for a couple of weeks, and usually your LMS, you can see when they've logged in as well. I'll pair that with, are they submitting, are they logging in, and that's attendance. And then we have early alerts at our college. If they're not attending for really over a week, I go ahead and file an early alert. I reach out to them directly. If I don't get a response, then I file the early alert because they're probably gone and we need to try to get them back on track. You're muted. I can't hear you. I'm just glad it's you and not me. I do that all the time.
Another audience question. I'm debating about how much to discuss COVID. Someone says, it seems perfect for microbiology and even general bio. I could tie it into most topics in these courses, but I'm afraid that they might be overloaded with hearing about COVID. Thoughts on that?
I would encourage you to talk about it though, because there is a lot of fear around it. And I think the more that we discuss it and the more that you can tie it into really any course is good. Now, I did notice from January to March when I was on ground with my students that they were already, I could tell by the looks on their faces, because every class, the first 10 minutes, I would say, what are you hearing? And I knew they were kind of like, why does she, like, this is such a downer. Why does she keep bringing this up? I want to talk about happy things. But I did have a lot of students reach out to me, even after we had to go completely online, and thank me for that. And it also offers a comfort level to them that they have somebody to talk to about it that's knowledgeable, and it's going to help them navigate the overwhelming amount of information that we're getting, and not all of it is true. And we know that a lot of it has some sort of a agenda, often, times even political agendas. So I think students look to us as a refuge for information. So I would bring it up, maybe not talk about it too much, but bring it up often enough that they're comfortable with asking you questions.
Do you, have you been able to, everybody's been busy with everything going on, but have you been able to draw from any colleagues in other disciplines information that's been useful, particularly towards online strategies and techniques?
Absolutely. Really in two aspects. I'm on the college's pandemic emergency management team. And so that's a really interesting way to get a cross-section of faculty, staff, admin perspective on what we're facing. But then I do talk to a lot of colleagues. Luckily, the way our offices are arranged at the colleges, we're not like a hallway of all science and a hallway of all English, or a building of all one discipline. I'm integrated with everyone. Economics, there's English professors across from me. There's a math professor 2 doors down. So it's really nice to be able to go talk to everyone about what their perspectives are and what they're experiencing in their online classes. And, really with as I mentioned earlier, the course integrity, I have had some issues with some cheating online, but it's really from colleagues that I was just astounded at the things that they are experiencing. One caught students, he was giving them a 2-hour window to test for their exams. And in that 2 hours, they were uploading exams to Chegg and paying a professional to fill out the exam for them, and then uploading it into the class. And it was really interesting to hear how he tracked all that down, but it was equally horrifying because I had no idea. And my generation kind of lags behind. I'm just a little bit older, than the students. So I'm shocked sometimes at what they think of to do. So I think that talking with colleagues, especially across disciplines, is really critical if you're going to do well in online teaching, to see what everybody's facing, because you may get duped for a whole year and not realize that something you were assigning is totally not going to work because the students are getting around it. And it's not as easy to pick up on as you think.
Here's another, actually two that are relevant to some of what we just talked about. One is a question regarding deadlines. Teaching a 4-week microbiology summer course, this person says they struggle with having assignments due every day, or all lecture lab assignments due at one time, for example, once a week. I prefer having daily deadlines, says this person, but I run into students who are working full-time and or taking other online courses and have problems meeting daily deadlines. Have you found something that works well in regards to deadlines?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to flexibility. And you may find that things that you wanted to do aren't working because of students' other commitments. And I think that's exceptionally true right now, considering the pandemic. Their schedules are changing as they shift jobs or shift when they have to be places. And every day is probably too often, in my opinion. I agree that probably be hard for them to meet. But in a 5-week course, you do want them turning in things often, because a week is like 20% of the course. So I understand the struggle there. I would be flexible on those due dates. I find myself being more flexible when students reach out to me and say, look, I've had a sick child and I had to work, we have a Nissan plant nearby, and I have students who tell me I had to work 12-hour shifts and I haven't had a chance to work on the course. Will you please help me? I find myself bending a little more now and moving deadlines. And I just try to do it in a way that I'm fair to everyone. So I just keep it in mind, if I bent for one student, then I may need to kind of come off of a hard deadline for the others and just kind of consider. And I think that's something as instructors we're all going to be facing, is just becoming more flexible and bending a little more while trying to maintain course integrity. And it's hard. It is very hard.
Good. And again, flexibility is probably part of this too, but setting, standards. Someone asks, testing and quizzes are stressful. Given the growing stress as a result from current mitigation, how much grade point weight should assignments of those types be given compared to, say, written report assignments?
It depends on the course you're teaching and, what overall you're trying to get, what your learning objectives are. I would probably put more weight on things that are the take-home message that are really critical for them to take forward. Like, I teach general biology courses too, and those set the stage for microbiology and anatomy and physiology and some of the upper level courses. So I give more weight to assignments that are going to help them succeed after they take my class. So that'd be my recommendation for that. And again, if whoever that person is wanted to share specifics with me later, I could help them figure out what might work.
Here's someone asking, someone that doesn't necessarily like the lab question, is I think knew at the outset is on a lot of people's mind. This person doesn't really like the notion of the virtual labs or their style, but wants to know if you have any recommendations on take-home lab exercises that students could conduct at home using, say, a microscope.
The microscope one is hard. I mean, if they don't have one, and they can purchase, cheaper microscopes from some of these companies. I don't know that you could get a good one for less than $300 though. So that you're getting into a cost issue with that. I hate to even say it out loud, but they can watch videos on how to learn microscopes. Don't shoot me through the computer here. Some of you, I know you're cringing, but the reality is conventional is best. I'm agreeing with everyone who feels that way. But the challenge we have now is how to do this virtually. Microscope activities, I've had students watch videos, and then like one thing we do is learn microscope parts. So diagrams of microscope parts, so at least they know how it's supposed to work and what all the parts are for. And then, magnification calculations so that they know what ocular lenses, how much they're seeing a magnified image. Those are really take-home messages when you're using a microscope anyway, is what the ability of the microscope is to see small things. So that's the best I can suggest right now.
That's good. Let's talk a little bit about, you've talked, about the students obviously, but have you got, and talked about other colleagues, have you ever gotten any, or especially more recently, any aha moments from students that have helped influence your thinking about ways to, make the course meet more the needs of the students across the board?
Yeah, I think the biggest aha moment when everything came to a screeching halt on ground and moved online is you realize that's a majority of students aren't prepared for online learning. They were just forced into it, a lot like the instructors. And I think you can empathize with them in that. It's like, we weren't ready for this. And a lot of students, especially where I am in Tennessee, they're in rural areas. They don't have good internet connections. Wi-Fi is an issue. Maybe they didn't have reliable devices. So the college had to quickly figure out how to administer, iPads or laptops so that they can complete things. And then we had to figure out, where they might be able to get Wi-Fi or free Wi-Fi somewhere to complete the work. And then aha moments, I I interact with my students as much as I can. And I will say that I send them emails. It's probably like 10 to 1. I send them 10 emails and I might get one back. And that can be pretty discouraging as an instructor too, where you're like, what is going on? I'm sending them emails all the time and I'm communicating with them all the time and I'm hearing nothing. But the aha moment is I realize they're listening, because sometimes 2 weeks later, they'll send me an email and say, hey, I saw where you wrote that. And I've been thinking about it ever since. So don't get discouraged, I think, with the lack of communication that you're going to experience with them, because they're not always really good at responding. I think I'm used to an internet etiquette where if someone emails me, I just quickly send them an email back and say, thanks for the email, I'll look at this. And I think a lot of us are used to that as professionals. But the younger people I'm noticing aren't as good at that. And it's not necessarily that they don't care, they're not paying attention. So go ahead and send the emails and communicate. But if you're comfortable with the Google Voice, I would do that too, because you'd be surprised how many of them text you. So it's figuring out what means of communication is going to get the response you're looking for.
Related to that, the communication piece, what about what best practices or things that have worked? And I'm sure it's going to be a variety of things, but for student participation in an online or virtual course, trying to get more of that happening.
I think they need social interaction with each other. And that's a big piece of why they go to college. Yes, there's an academic need and they need to learn things. But the social aspect is a big part of it for students. They want to meet people. I mean, all of us can think back to people we met in college that we're probably still friends with. You make some lifelong friends at college. And when we endure challenges with each other, there's a camaraderie. So they need that. So shifting from feeling isolated in an online course, you have to create a way to where you can shift them into a camaraderie with each other, where they're going to build lasting relationships with each other through it. So it shifts from less of, I'm overwhelmed, this class sucks, it's too hard, I can't believe I have to do this assignment, to if they realize other students are working on it too. So I would say, try to do some group assignments, try to do some group discussions, try to do some group breakout sessions in Zoom as well, or even assign them to work on something together virtually where they're sharing a phone number and they are talking or texting with each other to complete an assignment together. Some people may not like group assignments, but I think given the current state that we're in, the group assignments are probably the best way to get them to find each other and find some camaraderie to support each other, to have a support group in a way with each other.
Great. Here in the Q&A is not so much a question, but a comment that I thought I'd bring up because it ties to a bit of what we were talking about with assignments. Erica Lopez says, I found that for scaffolded assignments, it works well to build and release restrictions where a student doesn't have access to one part of an assignment until they've submitted the part that's meant to be completed before it. Thoughts on that? Or
I think that's a great way to do it. I have not personally done that, but I like that idea because they can get overwhelmed if they see the whole elephant, so to speak, that they need to consume in the course. So if you're giving them just a little bite at a time and then praising them and having them build on it as they go, I think that would be a fantastic method. That's a good way to go.
Okay, great. What do you see, and I know you've taught online prior to the pandemic a good bit, we've talked about that in the past, but do you see teaching style in general becoming more flexible even when you are able to teach classroom sessions on campus in the future based on what you've learned from the last several months and online teaching prior to that?
I think everyone's teaching is going to be forever changed by this. And if it's not, you might want to check how rigid you are in your ways. Things that don't bend break. So you need to think about, if you're having to make changes now, you're probably going to incorporate those later on ground. I have found that teaching online has actually made me a better on-ground professor because you do think about things differently, and you're trying new things and you're realizing it worked really well. You might have been cynical about something like this isn't going to work. And then you're like, oh my gosh, that worked fantastic. And I think I want to use it in the on-ground class too. So I think as we all go through this, that your teaching will change. And it could mean more flexibility because of, we just talked about the student that's working and needs an extension on a deadline. You do become a little more empathetic, and not that you won't have hard deadlines. Like there are some things that you'll just say, no, this is a hard deadline. Like you knew for 4 weeks and you should have planned ahead, and that's okay. But you will realize to come off some small things. And that's what I have done, like a 5-point quiz. If they missed a deadline, it really doesn't impact the overall course success if I give them like an extra day to do it if they missed it. So I do think we'll become more flexible, and teaching will change.
Great. Along the lines of what you're talking about, some of the changes, maybe putting your community college leader hat on from those days, what advice would you give to other institutions as they head into the fall? And I know the future is never easy to predict, but particularly now, any thoughts on where higher ed might be in 6 months to a year?
Well, I would say hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And we all know the worst case scenario is that we're going to have to maintain an online presence only. That's the worst thing that can happen, is you just can't go back to campus because viral infection rates and R naught is too high, and it's just too risky to go back. And you can also get caught up in what we're beginning to see is some of the policy and the protocols. Like if someone comes into a building and they've tested positive for COVID and we find out, then you've got to shut the building down for 24 hours. So I think the worst outcome of all of that is that you can't go anymore. And administrators should be planning for the worst case scenario and then hope that they can dial it back a little bit. And if all of the instructors are going to be required to teach online, they need a lot of support. They're going to need training. You can't just expect an instructor to just know what to do. So you at least need to align them with faculty mentors that have been teaching online that can give them some guidance and encourage them too. Like they're like, this assignment was terrible. What did I do wrong? And then training on how to use a lot of the things that we're talking about. Maybe they don't know how to send out a Zoom invitation, or they don't know how to do a Kaltura video, or they don't know how to do a lot of things. So faculty training, that should have already been occurring, but if it's not, that should be happening as soon as possible, where you're getting, your IT folks together to set up webinars like this one to walk people through how to do things so that they can be better at teaching. I do think, eventually we'll have a vaccine that's effective, and that we will come out of this. I mean, this too shall pass, King Solomon said. So we will get there. When? I would say it's a reasonable expectation to expect mostly online this fall for most colleges, and that will probably extend through the spring. Because even with the extremely fast speed that vaccines are being developed, those being administered to people and having herd immunity, still at the fastest would be about a year. So I think colleges should expect not having a normal situation through at least the spring semester.
You talked about, in answering that question, a little bit about peer-to-peer work with faculty members helping each other. Do you, and historically, some people have had team-taught classes. Do you see that type of model? If someone's got their plan set for fall, maybe they can't flip it now, but could that be a helpful way for people to teach, pairing up with each other for an actual course that's delivered online?
I think depending on the topic you're teaching, that could work well, especially in like courses like physical science, which covers a little bit of chemistry, a little bit of physics, a little bit of biology. Those very general courses are really some of the more perfect ones to have faculty teaming up together and then teaching what their forte is, and then kind of tossing off the next section to another instructor who's better at that particular area. So I think that could be something that we see more of after this too, where you're teaming up with faculty.
What, flipping a little bit to sort of the career preparedness, job skills, any ways to help the students with some of that in a case of courses that are online, and you know, any partnering that you've either had or been able to you know, see that might be out there with organizations in your community that are trying to be creative around how to, you know, help students get experiential types of whether it's internships, micro internships, things of that nature that could help them once they're, you know, finish their degree.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more partnerships for that. I mean, workforce development has to continue, the skills training has to continue. And even if a college needs to go most, if not completely online, depending on regional rates of outbreak, there are just certain fields that you're going to have to figure out how to bring them on ground anyway. And I know that makes some people cringe, but when you look at mechatronics and when you look at nursing, you know, they need to learn how to start an IV on someone. You know, the skills, careers, that's hands-on. They have to learn how to do it. So the focus then is PPE and how to protect everyone while they're learning, and, you know, follow CDC guidelines on appropriate PPE for instructors and the students. But you have to figure out how to make that happen, because it's not sustainable to keep everything shut down with no movement economically, jobs, skills, training. So it's a challenge, no doubt, but it's something that having a nice cross section of faculty, staff, administrators, community members can help figure out what's going to work best.
Excellent. We're getting close to the top of the hour. And I'll just remind people, we've had some really good questions. If people were joined late and didn't know about the way to answer questions, the Q&A button is how to do that, not the chat. So feel free to continue sending in questions. But any thoughts on places you gather inspiration from that, you know, in particular helps your teaching and your ideas for where we're at now and this future that's you know, as we've said, is going to be less certain than it normally would be?
Well, I think I lean most on colleagues that are teaching online or have taught online for a number of years. I find myself seeking them out. I think it's just the people connection. Maybe part of it is feeling isolated ourselves, you know, because a lot of us are staying home more often or not interacting with people. But I reach out to colleagues a lot and just say, hey, I want to do an assignment. You know, if it's a paper, even though it's a scientific research paper, I do reach out to English colleagues, English professor colleagues, and say, how could I do this and ensure that they're not cheating, or I'm seeing this in my class, or I'm not able to motivate them to take something seriously. What have you had success with? So really talking with other colleagues is the key to having those moments where you're like, well, this will work. I used to organize for the faculty at the Smyrna campus when I was dean. I would have what works workshops, or they would sometimes schedule them with each other. It just kind of caught on where they would sometimes, we can't do this now, but you could do it through Zoom. They would go to restaurants and talk about what was working in their classes and what wasn't working in their classes. So I would encourage faculty to do that. You might think, well, there's nothing I can learn from an English professor. I teach science. You'd be surprised in talking to a colleague of another discipline, what insights they have to assignments and courses and things that they've tried. Everything we do is a lot more related than you think. There's a lot of common threads to what instructors are doing. So I would encourage anybody to do that at your colleges. Maybe you're the one that needs to organize the Zoom meetings and send out the link to everybody and say, let's just talk. There's no agenda. Just tell me how your class is going and what your challenges are. And sometimes, again, that comes down to camaraderie. Like, what are you facing? What are the frustrations in your class? And you'd be surprised how someone can just say, oh, well, don't do that, do this. And you're like, oh my gosh, why didn't I think of that? So I would encourage you to do that.
Great. One thing will mention, if people didn't look at the Q&A to ask questions, a few people have posted some nice links. We're going to send out the recording of this webinar, as we mentioned at the beginning, but a few folks have put some nice links to lab sites and things that are out there. If you didn't see that, those are there. So we're getting near the end. Any final thoughts of things we didn't address that you would leave as sort of parting thoughts to the audience?
I think, just like I said, you wouldn't think about communication as being such a big piece maybe, but it's a huge piece. Communicating with each other, like I said, about what works. Communicating with your students. I think in the state that we're all in, with sort of being locked down and cautious, and the physical or social distancing from one another, I wish they would call it physical distancing instead of social distance, because I think social distance implies that you're not allowed to talk to people. But it's really about physical distancing so that you don't get sick, but do work on the social end with both your students and your colleagues, and anticipate questions that you're going to be asked if you can. Make your course as relevant as you can to what's going on in real life. You'll probably get asked a lot of questions about the vaccine that's coming up soon if you're teaching science, for those of you who are on the science, because again, students look to you as the person with the information. They think you know everything because you're a professor of science. And so anticipate that. And if you don't know a lot about it, I would start reading more about it, and I'd read the reputable resources so that you're ready to answer their questions, because I think there's going to be a lot around that one.
That's great. And I think, you talk about the regular communication being flexible. Different types of communication sounds like is key to as well. Another person chimed into the Q&A that they started using Google Voice as well and found that it was helpful for the students, because I think, as you noted, that different people, not only students, but different generationally and other reasons, just sometimes prefer different ways to communicate than or traditional phone conversations. So let me, any other final thoughts? And I'm going to, while you're, I think I'm going to pop up, there's nothing new that's come in the Q&A. I'll share your information here in a second too.
Now, just if anybody thinks of something later, I know that I'm bad about this. Like, I'll probably after this webinar be like, I should have told them, this point or that point, and it just slipped my mind at the time. But if anybody's watching or listening and they think of a question that maybe didn't make it through the Q&A, or they don't feel like maybe I answered the way they wanted me to, that's fine too. Feel free to reach out, and I'll help you the best that I can, or I can connect you with some other professors where I teach too. And we have a really great team at Motlow, and I'm sure a lot of them would be happy to answer questions if it's out of my discipline.
Hang on just a second. I lost my screen with the contact. I'll grab that real quick here.
Yeah.
Okay, so as Elizabeth said, she's more than happy to take follow-up questions from folks. And, so her email is here, and the PanOpen contact information is also on the screen. At our website, you can click literally on a chat button there and get some basic questions answered, or request a follow up for someone to connect with you to demo our platform further. And I think we're going to give everybody about 5 more minutes in their day back. We appreciate all the questions, everybody's participation today. I know this is a difficult summer for many folks. As we've run these webinar series, we've had really good attendance, and yet not knowing what's happening with a lot of schools' plans continually changing for fall, it's hard to know what people, are able to do the way they've thought about things in the past. So I think being able to collaborate with colleagues is useful, as Elizabeth said, is one of her tools. So I hope this has been helpful. Again, thanks for joining us. Feel free to reach out with questions, and have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you. I've enjoyed the opportunity. Thank you.